Hi friends, welcome to our discussions for Module 2, moving forward with ED 638B. Thank you for joining me. I have my little profile picture up here on the screen, not because I like my picture at all, but simply because I would like to ask all of you if you could please possibly consider posting a profile picture for your account. I like to see what you guys look like, and I always say I'd like to know that if we were standing in line together at the grocery store that I might recognize you. Plus I think it's fun for your classmates also to see who they're talking to when they respond to discussion boards. So please consider doing that if you can. If you need help, ask the nearest kid. I'm sure they'll be able to help you with posting that profile picture. This beginning little video here I'm kind of thinking of as almost like the ramblings of a mad woman or a reading nerd kind of thing. I have several thoughts that occurred to me as I was rereading the chapter that you guys just read, so I decided to kind of like throw up them all in this one little video presentation to go over a couple of things that I wanted to share. Okay, so here we go. I have posted in Module 1 an article that I told you was optional for you to read, and that article was called The Comprehension Matrix. Some of you may have taken a look at it, but if you didn't, it was okay because I said that it was optional. But then later on I realized that there was information in that article that I really wanted to share with you and really didn't want you to miss. So we're going to talk about that just very briefly here. The first thing before we talk about that I wanted to mention, and I think I may have mentioned it in Module 1, is for you guys to have in mind the idea that reading is not a natural process at all. We are not born to be readers. If you think about it, our babies, when they're born, they will start to babble and they will start to make sounds without us teaching them how to do that. So therefore, speaking and verbalizing is a natural process. It's something that's just going to happen. So our speech patterns, unless there's some sort of problem, our speech is going to develop naturally. But reading will not. Reading is not something that our brains are naturally developed to do. Now, of course, it's easier for some of us than others, but for some children, it's not. And we have to remember that we can't just expect them to have the talent and to know how to read. Very often, our children need to be taught. And because of that, we have to keep in mind, too, that comprehension and understanding text is a very complex task. And there's an awful lot that we as teachers have to consider and have to think about when we're going to be working on comprehension activities with our kiddos, especially when we know we have some babies who are going to struggle. Okay? So because of that, and this is where the comprehension matrix comes in. The comprehension matrix and other research studies actually have mentioned that when we are planning reading instruction for our students, there are 3 components that we have to consider. The first thing that we have to consider is who are the readers? Who are the children that are going to be reading this text? Do we have average readers? Do we have strong readers? Do we have struggling readers? Do we have a combination? And what are some things that we know our students struggle with if they are going to struggle? So we have to first think of who are the children. The next thing we really have to think about is the text. What do we know about the text? What genre is it? First of all, is it informational? Is it narrative? If it's narrative, is it realistic fiction? Is it fantasy? What is it? Is it poetry? Is it a newspaper article? And what do we know about that text? And what do our students know about that type of text that they're going to encounter? Or what do we need to teach them to help them to understand what it is that they're going to be seeing? What do we know about any graphic aids that come with the text? What do we know about the complexity of the sentences? What do we know about the vocabulary? What do we know about the structure? Anything. What do we understand about that text? And we have to think about that when we're thinking of our instruction. And then the third thing is the situation. What is the environment that the students are going to be in when they're reading this text? And I also like to think with the situation of we have to think of the task and the purpose, the idea of why are they reading it? What's the reason why I'm asking them to spend some time doing this? Okay, so the comprehension matrix, if you saw it, looks like this. If you didn't, here it is. And you can see that across the top are those 3 areas that we just mentioned. There's the reader, the text, and then the situation. And what the comprehension matrix does is it helps you to think through those 3 areas in terms of what would you do before reading, what would you do during reading, and what would you do after reading. So you can see that if you think about your reader, first with pre-reading, here are some suggestions once you've thought about, who are the guys that are going to be reading this. Here are some things you could do before they read. And then if you're thinking of the text, in terms of pre-reading and you think of some areas of the text, what are some things that you could do before reading? And the situation, what are you asking them to do? What's the purpose? Before reading, here are some things that you could do. And then you could see it goes through the same with during reading, considering your reader, considering your text, considering your situation, and then also post-reading. Same thing. Before reading, during reading. I'm sorry, post-reading with the reader, with the text, with the situation. So it's kind of a handy little matrix. But what I think is even more valuable, or actually probably equally as valuable as the comprehension matrix, are these questions that article provided for teachers to think about when they are planning comprehension instruction and when they're thinking of a text. So those questions being, what do I know, or what do my students know about the topic that they're going to be reading about? Are there any specific terms or concepts that they need to understand before they can understand this passage? Are the students going to be interested in this topic? And if not, how can I get them interested in it? What connections can I help them to make so that they are interested in this topic? Purpose is huge. What's the purpose I can give for my students for reading? And I'm saying that because I can't tell you how many classes I've been in where the teacher has provided the students with something to read. And I said, okay, I'm going to put 15 minutes on the timer. We're going to read this. And then we'll discuss it, after the 15 minutes. Without giving those poor babies any idea of what it is they're reading or why they're reading it. So setting a purpose is tremendous for kids. What activities are the students going to engage in with the text? What are some strategies that they need to learn? Are you working on strategy instruction? And if you are, what strategy would be a really good one to demonstrate with the particular text that you're using? And then the final one is also gigantic. How are you going to help your students understand the vocabulary that is in that text? Because we know that vocabulary can often be the stopping block of what keeps kids from understanding text. So we've got to be aware of the vocabulary that they're going to encounter and what are those vocabulary and concepts that are going to be critical for them to know prior to them starting to read that text. Okay? So, you're thinking you have a short story that you want your students to read, so you're planning your instructions, so you're going to think about your students. Who are they? What are their needs? You're going to think about that text. What do you know about that text? And what are going to be some issues in that text that are going to provide trouble for your kids? So if it's a short story, is it a simple plot? Is it a text where there's different subplots? Or there characters that are interesting, or characters that they might need to watch what happens with them, the vocabulary, the sentence structure, all that. Think about your text. Think about the situation. When are these kids reading this? Is it right after lunch or right before lunch? Is it the end of the day? Is it first thing in the morning, nice and fresh? Is it going to be in a classroom that's quiet where they're going to be able to read? Or is there going to be some other activity going on while they're reading? Will they read alone? Will they read with a partner? How are they going to read it for homework? What's the situation? And then finally the task. What are you going to ask them to do with that text? Are they reading it just for enjoyment? Are they reading it so that you can talk about a strategy? Or are they reading it because you're really going to be digging into a theme, or really digging into characterization, or comparing one story to another story? What is it they're going to be doing? So then once you think of all those things, well, now how are you going to help them with all of this? And I just put story impressions up there because several of you mentioned after reading last week's chapter in the book that you like the strategy of story impressions. I personally absolutely love the strategy of story impressions, so I just threw that one up there, as that might be something that you might want to think about doing. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that you didn't miss the comprehension matrix. And if you did read it, great. And if you didn't, now you don't have to, because I just kind of gave you the most important information. Okay. In your text, you've read about question-answer relationships. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't miss that, because QAR, or question-answer relationships, to me is such a phenomenal and very, very important strategy to introduce our students and to use with our students. So if you have any children who, when you ask them questions, they have a very, very difficult time answering questions, particularly anything that takes them beyond the literal level, and they might default to going back and skimming through the text and just finding words from the text that are part of the question that you ask them and writing them down as the answer. QAR is a strategy to help those guys, because what is happening is that it's another situation where we have to teach children how to think, because they just might not know that what we're asking them is a situation where they're going to have to use more than just the text to answer the question, and that more is usually their very own brain. Okay, so we're going to teach them that there's a difference between right there questions, or the literal level questions, or the on the line questions, or the whatever you want to call them, but the questions that literally they can point to the answer in the text. Here's the answer. I can find it. It's right here. And we have to make sure that the students understand that not all questions are those kind of questions, that there are other questions where other skills have to come into play. So another kind of question similar to a right there question is a think and search question, and that's the kind of question where the answer is on the page in the text, but it might be in different parts of the text. So for instance, a question might be, what were several reasons why this character was angry and walked out of the room? And maybe that's in several different places in the text. So that would be a think and search kind of question. Then we get to where the inferential thinking comes in, and this is what stumps a lot of our kids. And this is where we have to make sure that they understand that some of the answer is going to come from their own head, or their own experience, their own knowledge. And the first kind is the author in you question, and that's the kind of question where the kids have to use the information in the text plus what they know and put those two things together. So the author is giving part of the answer, and then their own head is giving part of the answer. And it's funny to me that there's a little chain on this section, because that's exactly what I used to tell my kids. I used to tell them these are the chain to the brain questions, and that your brain is chained to the book, and that there's a connection between what's happening in the book and what's happening in your head. So the two of you are chained together, and you have to work together to answer the questions. So there would be your basic inferencing questions. And then your on my own questions, they're questions where the answer is not in the text at all. The kids are going to use their own knowledge to answer the question. And they might be things like, what would you do if you were in this situation? Or, which character do you think might make a good friend? Or what do you think this character would do if this happened? So questions that they can answer without the text at all, just based on what they know. All right, so QAR is huge. You can teach the kids to identify what kind of questions are being asked prior to them answering them, or however you want to work them. But they're very important to teach the kids, especially if they're having difficulty with answering questions. And I attached to the module 2 more resources for you to take a look at on QAR. The first one that's there is phenomenal. It's several pages long because there's so much information in there, and different blackline copies and things like that you can use when you're trying to teach QAR. And it also takes it through various levels. I know we've got some kindergarten folks all the way through high school folks with us, so there's some good stuff there for everybody. And then the second one are some question starters for each of the different kinds of questions. So don't be sure to miss that information, or be sure not to miss that information, rather. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about. In your text, this was mentioned, but I didn't think it was done in a very good way, and this is a huge bit of information. And this is the idea that sometimes when we give feedback to our struggling readers, we don't do it always in a very useful way. And our struggling readers sometimes really have no idea why they've achieved success when they do. Sometimes they'll just attribute it to, oh, well, the teacher likes me, or she was in a good mood today, or it was luck, I did this by luck. Sometimes they don't always understand that it's their very own efforts and that will allow them to be successful. So the book kind of mentioned this, but I wanted to go over it a little bit further in a way that I know that I think is very helpful. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to go see or attend a workshop with Dr. Eric Jensen, who is phenomenal if you ever have an opportunity to go see him. He does a lot of work with how poverty affects the brain and engaging strategies for students in poverty. And this is something that he mentioned in one of his lectures. And he is very, very aware of effect sizes, and that's this little box right here. And what effect sizes do is they give us information on how effective certain strategies are that we try to use with our students. So you can see the greater the number, the stronger the effect is. Okay, and the more successful the strategy is going to be. And his theory is we should not waste our time trying strategies that have a low effect size, because why? When there's other things out there that are going to be much more effective. So in terms of giving feedback, this is one thing that he mentioned. Just saying good job to a student, we might as well just be talking to the wall. We're wasting our breath. It really has a very, very low effect size and really means nothing. The students don't get any information from that is helpful. If we focus our comments on SEA, which I'll explain that to you in a minute, what that is, that pops the effect size up to 0.74, and you can see that falls into this range, the strong to extreme range. And if we add attributions to our SEA comments, then that knocks the effect size up to 1.42, which is an extremely strong effect size. And again, I'm going to explain that to you as well. Okay, so SEA. When we are focusing our feedback comments on our students using SEA, that means that our comments are either going to be about the strategy that they have used, the effort that they have put forth, or the attitude that they displayed when they were doing whatever the task was. So strategy, what strategy did you use to help you make sense? How do you think that helped you? For feedback, the effort, did you put forth an appropriate amount of effort in trying to read and understand this, or how might you improve your effort? And your attitude, did you display a positive or negative attitude toward this reading task? Now, we don't have to make a comment on all three of those every single time, but if we try to think of either strategy, effort, or attitude when we're going to make a comment to a student, whether it's a positive comment or a negative comment, it's going to be a lot more meaningful for the student and will give them a lot more information. So that's a 0.74 effect size, but now to pop it up to and my little Google Eye man got in the way, it should be 1.42. To pop it up to a 1.42 effect size, we add an attribution to that SEA comment. So when we add an attribution, we're saying something that will tell them how their strategy, their effort, or their attitude will lead toward continued success. Okay, so an example, I loved how that strategy of how you tried the strategy of visualizing while you read. That strategy will help you understand anything you try to read. Okay, so giving them that idea of what I've done here that I did well will help me in the future. I like that you refused to give up and you reread parts that confused you. That extra effort will help you when we discuss this text as a class. So again, what you've done will help you in the future. Before you began, you knew you were going to understand this text. That positive attitude will help you work through our next text as well. So again, what you've done here will work for you again and will help you in the future. So that's adding an attribution, which again has a very strong effect size. So just something to keep in mind when you're just discussing and giving students feedback on the work that they're doing. Okay, so that's kind of the end of the ramblings that I had after just going back through the text and the work, some things that I wanted to touch base with you about. The next thing that I want to share with you, just very briefly, are strategies that we're using a lot in Baltimore County. So I apologize to my Baltimore County friends who probably already know this. But there's this book called Notice and Note, Strategies for Close Reading, that was written by Kylene Beers and Robert Probst. And what Notice and Note does is it teaches signposts for students to be aware of as they're reading. And because we started off our discussion with fiction strategies, we're going to talk about their fiction signposts very briefly. So these are the signposts that Kylene Beers and Robert Probst suggest that we use when we're teaching students fiction. And what the signposts will do is they'll give students a way to, as they're reading, think through the text and be alert to certain things that they're reading, that they're going to see over and over and over again, no matter what the fiction story is. Some of these signposts are going to be present pretty much, except in our very low-level stuff. But these signposts are going to be there no matter what they're reading. So the signposts are contrasts and contradictions, and this would be when the students notice a character who is acting in a way that is contradictory to how that character has acted in the past. And a question that the students would stop and ask themselves when they notice that is, why is the character doing that, and how is that going to change the story? Words of the wiser are moments in the text where a wiser, probably older person than the main character is giving that character advice. And a question to ask there is, what is the lesson that this character is going to learn from this? And then how might that change what happens going forward? An aha moment is when the character suddenly has a realization and, realizes something that's going to be important. And the question to think about is, how is this going to change what's happening as we go forward? Again and again are moments where they're seeing the same thing happening over and over again, or the same item being discussed over and over again. And for my high school folks, you'll realize that that actually is symbolism, and getting into a discussion of symbolism and helping the students notice when something is a symbol. The memory moment, also a flashback. Why is the character remembering this thing from the past, and why is this memory important to this story? And then tough questions, when the character asks themselves something that really has no obvious answer. That's a difficult question. And the question the students should ask themselves when they realize a tough question is, what does this make me wonder? Okay, so there are the signposts. I have attached, again, to the module a video of a teacher doing a fantastic job explaining the 6 different signposts. And she also gives examples from actual text for you to take a look at. And some thoughts of how the signpost could be used in your work. So please take a look at that video. I think that's going to do a much better job than I just did explaining the signposts to you. But the notice and note fiction signposts are something that we're using a lot in Baltimore County and have found them to be successful. Okay, so it's the end of this first little video. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take a look at those resources for the QARs that I've left you. There's question starters and there's another resource also. You're going to take a look at the notice and note signpost video. And then there's an article for you to read this week. It's called Snapshots of Our Journey to Thoughtful Literacy. This article expands on the idea of teaching students meta-comprehension strategies, which is, in my mind, very important, especially when we're working with our struggling readers. So you guys read that article and see what you think. And then there's one more video of me, for you to watch this week, on main idea and summarizing, and that's going to move us into discussion of nonfiction strategies. Okay, I'll talk to you in a bit.